yes, let's pick up where Rich left off and talk a little bit about the terminology of Robert's rules. So when people discuss parliamentary procedure, they often just throw the term Robert's rules around, and it is kind of the ubiquitous term for parliamentary procedure. But I think it's important for you to understand, and Rich, if you could just advance the slide one, that would help me. I think it's important for people to understand that what you call your parliamentary authority in your governing documents is important. So in an ideal world, if you want to specify a parliamentary authority in your bylaws, you would add a section, usually near the end of the bylaws, titled Parliamentary Authority, and you would want to say a best practice, if you want to use Robert's Rules of Order, would be to say the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, shall be applicable in all matters not covered by law, constitution, or bylaws, or not otherwise covered. What you wouldn't want to do is use the term just Robert's Rules or Robert's Rules of Order newly revised and cite a specific edition, because of course then that doesn't change as times change. Mm-hmm. And if you have a question or an issue of parliamentary procedure that arises, what you don't want is the fight to be over which version of Robert's Rules applies. Picking up a bit too on Rich's comments about the sort of the archaic and overwhelming nature of Robert's Rules of Order, I think we all, even those of us who are professionals in the field, are very sympathetic to that. And it's good to know, we had several questions along those lines, and it's good to know that it's not the only option out there. So if it is what you have specified in your bylaws, then you need to use it. And Rich held up the 12th edition. You can see what it looks like. And that's the edition to cite. That's the edition to rely on. It is not the same thing to go find Robert's Rules of Order for Dummies or an idiot's guide to Robert's Rules of Order, even though those are helpful tools, and rely on those. If you have it in your bylaws, you need to rely on the actual rule book. But there's another widely used parliamentary authority called the Standard Code of Parliamentary Procedure that was written a bit as a counter to Robert's Rules in an effort to make the field simpler, and it is much simpler to follow. So that's another option that's out there. Also, I think it is not out of the question for a church to write its own set of rules. And when you're trying to figure out whether to do that, the questions that you would want to ask yourself are where is the division of power? How many decisions are the members making? How many decisions are we making? In what types of business meetings are we making those decisions? So how many people are there? How contentious do things tend to be as a whole? And how do our business meetings tend to go? And obviously to the extent that the answers to those things are simple, you can maybe have a simpler set of rules than Robert's Rules of Order. To the extent they're more complex, or you have large numbers of people, then that gets harder. But I put that out there so you know it is an option. And I've had at least one client who has done that. So it is possible. It obviously, I wouldn't be a good lawyer if I didn't say it depends on the specifics of your situation, but it is possible. The other thing to know is that if your bylaws are silent as to a parliamentary authority, you cannot use Robert's Rules of Order as the end-all be-all. It then becomes persuasive for your group, not authoritative, because you haven't specified that you'll follow it. So you don't get to come and beat people over the head with it unless you've told them in the bylaws that that's the parliamentary authority you're going to follow. Also, when you think about parliamentary procedure, instead of thinking of it as a body of really complex rules, I find it helpful to just think of it as a way that groups can come together to make decisions in a way that each person's rights are protected. So in a body of a deliberative assembly, every person is equal. And so they have an equal right to information, they have an equal right to vote, they have an equal right to discuss. And what parliamentary procedure does is it comes along and it provides the rules to ensure those rights are protected. And so if you think of it that way, then it becomes maybe a little bit less complex and burdensome, because you can watch for those that those things are being protected. And that gives context to rules like, for example, that the motion to close debate, often called the previous question, takes a 2/3 vote, because you're cutting off a basic right of every person to speak. And so we're going to require a little bit of a higher majority for you to accomplish that. But if you think of it in that framework, it can help you make decisions even when you don't know the precise rule, because you can be monitoring that those basic rights are protected. Another parliamentary term that's thrown around a lot is the word table. I want to table that motion. What people are typically trying to do when they say that is they want whatever's on the floor to be gone. And what is important to understand about the motion to table is it can be made very late in the game. In other words, after you've discussed a motion for a long period of time, someone can come along and say, I move to table this. And it requires a majority vote, so not very high, and it's not debatable. And what Robert's rules really designed the motion to do was to be there for an emergency. And I mean, the kind of basic example is perhaps you're waiting to hear a report from somebody who's outside the group, and that person has just arrived. And so let's table this motion and set it aside temporarily so that we can hear the report and then we can come back to it. And over time, it has just progressed into this, like, I want to kill whatever's on the floor. And what you need to know, I think that's important, most people don't know, is there is something called a motion to take from the table. So if you actually picture a motion as a piece of paper, when somebody moves to table and that passes, that piece of paper goes and sits on a table, and it stays on the table until through this meeting and all the way through the next meeting. And during that period of time, anybody can move to say, I want to take it from the table, and it can come back. And so if you want to kill something and actually want it to be gone, you should use the motion to postpone indefinitely, which is just what it says. It postpones the motion indefinitely. It's never going to come back until enough time has passed that it is considered a new topic of business. But that's just a little bit of instruction for you on what table means and how to use it well.